Every time I do something, it changes my screen. God. Turn screen mode. Okay, I think we got this now. This, and we're gonna record. Okay, we are excited for another educational session inside of 7 Streams of Passive Income and what we're going to be teaching all of you today. So let me share my screen and we are going to jump in. Very excited about this. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Okay,
Yes.
awesome, beautiful. Okay. So, hello and welcome everyone. So first of all, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here. I know that everyone has a very busy schedule, so we truly appreciate you spending the next 30 minutes with us. So whether you're joining us because you're already an investor, you're curious about passive income, or you're simply exploring different ways to diversify your portfolio, you're in exactly the right place. So before we dive in, I want to set some expectations. So today's webinar is educational. So we're not going to be asking anybody to make any investments today. Our goal is much simpler than that. We want to introduce you to a different way of thinking about wealth. So because for most of us, we were taught that there are only a handful of ways to actually build financial security, like go to school, get a good job, contribute to your retirement account, maybe buy a rental property, hope the stock market cooperates. And while there's absolutely nothing wrong with these strategies, they're only part of the picture. So what we've discovered is that there are many experienced investors don't rely on one or two sources of wealth. They intentionally build multiple streams of income across different industries and different asset classes and different types of assets. So that's the philosophy behind the 7 Streams Investor Club. So today we're going to walk you through one real example, which is our commercial box truck business, and show you how it fits into a much larger strategy for building diversified passive income. So by the end of today's presentation, my hope is that you'll leave with a completely different perspective on what's possible. So with that, I'd like to ask you a quick question before we begin. How many of you ever worried about having too much of your financial future tied up in one place? So maybe it's your job, maybe it's the stock market, maybe it's one business. So if that's ever crossed your mind, I think today's conversation is going to resonate with you. So before we talk about trucks, business, or investor clubs, let's begin with something much more important. Let's talk about how wealthy families think differently about building resilience. So I know this isn't the most exciting slide, but it is one of the most important. So transparency matters to us. Everything we're sharing today is intended for educational purposes. Some of the examples we'll discuss include historical operating information and in, illustrations designed to explain how businesses work. So historical performance and projections are not guaranteed for future results, and all investments involve risk. Decisions should be based on your own due diligence and advice from qualified financial, legal, and tax professionals. So one of the things we want to build with 7 Streams of Income Investor Club is trust. And trust starts with being upfront. Alternative investments can be powerful additions to your portfolio. They can also involve risk. So today's goal is simply education. So our hope is that you leave with a better understanding of how alternative assets fit into a diversified strategy, not with the expectation that there's a risk-free investment rating waiting at the end of this presentation. If today's conversation interests you, we'll simply invite you to continue learning with us. That's it. Now, let's talk about something that changed the way both Hoy and I think about investing. I want you to imagine your financial future sitting on the table. Now, imagine how many legs are holding up that table. So this may be one of my favorite slides in the entire presentation because it illustrates one simple idea. On the left, you see the financial future supported by one pillar. Maybe that's a salary. Maybe that's a single business. Maybe it's a retirement account. Maybe it's one rental property. There's nothing inherently wrong with any of those. The problem is concentration. If that one pillar weakens, the entire structure becomes vulnerable. Now, look at the image on the right. So, nothing magical happened here. We didn't replace the table. We simply added more pillars. Those pillars might represent traditional investments, operating businesses, private investments, commercial assets, or other income producing activities. The point isn't that every pillar performs exactly the same. The point is that no single pillar has to carry the entire weight. When one stream slows down, the others continue supporting the structure. That's resilience. So I'd like to share something personal with you. So during different seasons of my life, I've watched people lose their jobs that they thought were secure. I've watched businesses struggle through economic cycles. I've watched entire industries change, and we're seeing it right now because of AI. What I've also noticed is that people who seem to navigate uncertainty the best rarely depend on one source of income. Instead, they've intentionally built options. That's really what diversification is, not complexity, not chasing trends, options. So I want you to think about your situation for a moment. If one of your primary income sources disappeared tomorrow, how much of your financial life would still be standing? So that's not meant to create fear. It's simply a question worth asking. So if resilience comes from multiple income streams, what kind of streams are we talking about? So this slide represents the philosophy behind everything we're building. So I want you to notice something. We're not saying abandon traditional investing. We don't believe it's an either or. For us, it's an and. We believe it's both. So traditional investing has an important role. Stocks, bonds, retirement accounts, real estate, those remain valuable parts of many portfolios. But many experienced investors also look beyond Wall Street. They look towards Main Street, towards operating businesses, towards commercial assets, towards opportunities that can generate cash flow through economic activity rather than being tied entirely to the public market performance. So that's where alternative assets begin to fit into the picture. So the name Seven Streams isn't about a number, really. It's a reminder. So, reminder to build your financial future on more than just one stream alone. So, because every additional stream has the potential to strengthen the entire structure. Remember that table? So, most of you who have heard my story know that came to this country at 26. My late husband had a dream. We took his dream. We turned it into a multi-million-dollar company, sold off parts of it in 2008, 2009. The economy crashed. And because that was our single source of income, we literally ended up losing everything. And so that was a big lesson for us. We only had one of those legs under the table. So we started building, building, building. And then unfortunately, my husband passed away in 2018. But this time when he passed away, we had actually created 13 streams of passive income. for my family. So if you imagine 13 legs, so what that allowed for is it allowed for me to take a year off and grieve with my twins. So again, I have personally lived through this several times, and one way that literally wiped us out, another way that literally kept my whole family going. So I want you to think about that, for your own situation. How many of those do you have? So the philosophy doesn't come from reading a book. It literally came from my own personal experience, and it came from conversations with so many other investors and families. So it came from watching how successful entrepreneurs think differently about wealth. And ultimately, it led me to partner with somebody whose journey has been completely different from mine, yet who arrived at exactly the same conclusion. So, Hoy, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that Catherine and I come from very different backgrounds, but we both ended up asking the same question. How do you build income that doesn't rely on one thing? So for me, that journey started much earlier than most people would expect.
So before we talk about the investment itself, I think it's important that you know who's behind the seven streams. So every investment opportunity starts with people. Ideas are important, but execution is what creates long-term success. So let me begin by sharing a little bit more about myself. So for many years, my passion has been about helping people, especially after my husband had passed, and the more families I learned didn't have multiple streams of passive income. This became a passion of mine. So, um, helping families create financial independence for themselves. I've had the opportunity to work with entrepreneurs, investors, business owners, and many different industries. And one thing kept standing out to me. The people creating lasting wealth weren't relying on a single strategy. So um, they weren't putting all their hopes into one stock, one property, or one business. They were intentionally building multiple streams of income that complemented one another. So that realization became the foundation for seven streams. So my role is to help identify opportunities, build relationships, perform due diligence, and connect investors with educational resources and opportunities that align with our philosophy and diversification. So, but this story really accelerated when Hoy and I actually met.
Thanks, Catherine. So my journey looks a little bit different. Right now, I'm 21, currently in college, and I've been an entrepreneur for almost 9 years of my life. And most of that time has been spent building an e-commerce business. So if you ever been involved on an online business, you know things move fast. One month it's something different, the next month it's gone. Algorithms change, advertisements change, consumer behavior change, and you're constantly adapting. So while I love entrepreneurship, I realized something pretty quickly. I didn't want my entire financial future tied up in one industry. I wanted assets that could continue producing income even when I'm not working. That led me to start exploring different business models. We tested luxury vehicle rentals, we tested economy vehicle rentals, and we learned what worked and what didn't work. And then we found something that made us stop and pay attention: commercial box trucks. And once we understood why businesses rent these vehicles, everything started to make a lot more sense. So let's compare the business model when we started with to the one to the one we're building today.
So I want to make something very clear before we continue. This presentation isn't about choosing Wall Street or Main Street. We believe that there's a place for both. Traditional investments, stocks, bonds, EFTs, retirement accounts can all play an important role in business wealth, but many experienced investors also allocate part of their portfolio to businesses and alternative assets that generate cash flow through real economic activity. So I want you to think about it this way. If you invest in public markets, you're buying ownership in companies you don't control. When you invest in certain private operating businesses, you're participating in businesses that generate revenue from customers using real products and services every single day. So that's a different source of potential cash flow. So one isn't necessarily better than the other, they're just different. And because they're different, they can complement one another. So that's one of the reasons we're passionate about diversification. So instead of relying entirely on one system, you're creating multiple sources of opportunity. So one of those opportunities for us became commercial fleet vehicles. So why trucks and more specifically, why commercial box trucks?
So when people hear vehicle rentals, they think about Turo. That's exactly where we started. Luxury vehicles, economy vehicles, consumer rentals, and we learned a lot. But over time, we noticed something. Consumer rentals can be unpredictable. People rent for vacations, weekends, special events. Demand often follows travel patterns and discretionary spending. Commercial businesses are different. Businesses rent because they need to keep operating. A contractor lands a project, a logistic company needs additional capacity. A moving company has seasonal demand. A local business has equipment to transport. Those those needs don't always disappear because someone cancels a vacation. They're tied to business operations that completely changes the customer profile. So if you take a look at the chart, look at the differences. A instead of a B2C rental, we're primarily serving B2B customers. Instead of rentals lasting 2 or 3 days, many commercial rentals last weeks to even months. Instead of depending on primarily a discretionary spending, demand is tied to companies doing business. That creates a much different operating environment that consumer rental market than the consumer rental market. Now, does that eliminate risk? Of course not, but every business has risk. But understanding who your customer is and why they're renting changes how you think about the business. So once we identified the business model, the next question became, who's actually going to run it? This is probably one of the most important slides in the presentation. Whenever I evaluate investment opportunities, I ask one question before almost anything else. Who is the operator? Because ideas are everywhere, execution is rare. That's where Anthony comes in. Anthony has spent approximately 5 years building and managing commercial rental fleets across luxury vehicles, economy vehicles, commercial trucks. He's managed more than 100 vehicles. But what impressed me wasn't just the numbers of the vehicles, it was the systems. He already had the relationships, he already had the customers, he already had the operational processes. He already understood maintenance, scheduling, fleet utilization, and customer acquisition. That meant we weren't trying to invent a business. We were plugging an assets into an existing operating system. Our role begins with sourcing vehicles or quality vehicles. We identify opportunities, negotiate acquisitions, and complete and purchase process. Once the vehicle is placed into the fleet, Anthony's team manages the day-to-day operation. That includes customer acquisition, scheduling, maintenance, coordination, inspections, repairs, and keeping the vehicles working. As investors, we're not answering customer phone calls or coordinating repairs. We're relying on an experienced operator to execute the business. So personally, I currently have 9 vehicles under Anthony's management. Working with him has reinforced something that I believe applies to every business. You don't have to become an expert at everything. You just need to be a partner with people who already are.
So now that you've seen why we chose commercial box trucks and how we've partnered with an experienced operator, let's take a look at where we're at today. At the moment, we have 3 commercial box trucks actively operating, with a 4th truck currently being onboarded into the fleet. So now some people might look at this and think only 3, and the answer is yes. We're intentionally building this business methodically. One of the biggest mistakes entrepreneurs make is trying to scale before they have a proven model. So we'd rather build a strong foundation than grow too quickly. Each truck teaches us something. Each acquisition improves our process. Every rental gives us more operational data. That's how we build a sustainable business. So the slide also shows a historical gross revenue range of approximately 750 to $1,000 per truck per week. So these are historical operating figures based on our experience to date. They aren't guaranteed predictions. They're simply examples of how these trucks have performed under certain operating conditions. Future results can vary based on utilization, maintenance, customer demand, and market conditions. The number itself isn't the point. The point is understanding the business model. Commercial customers need these vehicles to keep their businesses moving. When demand is steady, the trucks become productive operating assets. And that's how we think about them, not vehicles, as businesses. So I'd like you to think about something. When you drive down the road and see a commercial truck, most people see a truck. We've trained ourselves to ask a different question. What business is that asset supporting? So the simple shift in thinking changes how you begin looking at investment opportunities. So, of course, revenue is only half of the equation. Like every business, there are expenses. So let's look at how we think about operating the fleet.
All right, so one thing we've tried to do throughout today's presentation is be transparent. Every business has expenses. Commercial fleets are no different. Professional management, DOT inspections, registrations, routine maintenance, repairs, insurance, those aren't surprises. They're simply part of running a professional operation. So if you take a look at the slides, that's why we focus on a net operating performance, not just gross revenue. On the screen, you'll see a few historic examples from our fleet. For example, one of our 2020 box trucks generated approximately $2,400 in net operating income over a 2-month period after normal operating expenses. Our 2013 truck generated approximately $2,500 over a similar period, and our 2015 truck generated approximately $580 during its initial operating period, which was shorter as it was still ramping up. Now, why do we show these numbers? Not because we wanted anyone to focus on one truck. We certainly not because we're suggesting future trucks will perform the same. We share them because transparency builds trust. Every asset has its own story. Some perform better than others. Some spend more time in maintenance. Some stay on rent longer. That's a real business. If you ever owned a rental real estate or already understand this concept, one property might need a new roof, another might go several years with very few unexpected expenses. Operating businesses work the same way. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is having systems that manage the ups and downs over time. So naturally, the next question becomes, what happens when things don't go according to plan?
So I actually love this slide because it reflects one of our core beliefs. So successful investors don't ignore risk. They engineer around it. Every investment carries risk. Every business carries risk. The question isn't whether risk exists. The question is, how are you preparing for it? So let's start with some of the obvious risks. A truck could break down. It could require unexpected repairs. It could be in an accident. A vehicle could be stolen or damaged. Those things happen. So pretending they won't isn't a strategy. So instead, we focus on mitigation. Commercial insurance helps protect against major losses. GPS tracking provides visibility into the fleet. Maintenance reserves are established so routine maintenance doesn't become emergencies. Vehicles are sourced through dealers rather than unknown private sellers whenever possible. And perhaps the most important is we work with experienced operators whose job is to manage these issues every single day. So this is one of the biggest differences between investing and operating. So as an investor, we don't need to know how to replace the transmission. We need confidence that the operating team has the systems in place to address those situations when they arise. So I found that some of the best investments aren't the ones that promise to eliminate risk. They're the ones that acknowledge the risk honestly and then show you how it's managed. That's exactly what we're trying to build, not perfection, a disciplined operating system. So I'll ask you another question. When you evaluate an investment, do you spend more time asking about potential returns or asking how the risks are managed? So in my experience, experienced investors eventually spend more time on the second question. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to include this slide. So we've talked about philosophy, we've talked about team, we've talked about the business model, we've talked about operating processes and how we think about risk. Now, I'd like to zoom back out because while commercial box trucks are an important example, they're only one stream. The bigger vision has always been something much bigger. So um, now as we zoom back out, everything we've discussed today, the commercial trucks, the operating partner, the business model, is one example of how we think about this alternative asset class. But that isn't the destination, it's the beginning. So this slide represents our long-term vision. So step one is proving the concept. Can we identify opportunities? Can we build relationships with experienced operators? Can we create repeatable systems? Can we learn and improve? Once we've done that, we move into expansion. Excuse me, not expansion for the sake of growth, expansion because the system supports it. From there, we continue optimizing operations. We reinvest. We strengthen the balance sheet. We refine the process. And eventually, mature operating businesses may have options for recapitalization, sale, or continuing the operation, depending on what's the best interest of the business and the stakeholders. So the important thing is this: we're not trying to collect trucks. We're trying to build scalable operating business. I often tell people this: if all we owned 10 years from now was a collection of trucks, I would consider that a missed opportunity. What we're building is an ecosystem. Commercial vehicles are one stream. Tomorrow, it may be another operating system. The next year, it could be another alternative asset class. Seven Streams has never intended to represent one investment. It represents a philosophy of diversification. And that philosophy is exactly why we created the Seven Streams Investor Club. So everything we've shown you today leads to this, the Investor Club. We've often asked, people have often asked us, are you creating a truck investment? And the answer is no. We're creating a community of investors who want to think differently about building wealth, people who enjoy learning, people who appreciate due diligence, people who understand that wealth is built over decades, not weekends. Our ideal investor, our ideal member is somebody who is thinking long term, somebody who values diversification, somebody who's comfortable exploring alternative asset classes, somebody who may have capital available to allocate over time depending on future opportunities and their financial goals. Most importantly, somebody who's curious. Who isn't this for? It's not for somebody looking for guaranteed returns because those don't exist. It's not for somebody looking to get rich in the next month. And it's probably not a right fit for somebody who needs immediate access to every dollar that they've invested. We want members who understand that thoughtful investing requires patience, discipline, and education. So one thing we've learned is that the quality of the community matters just as much as the quality of the investment. That's why we're intentionally building this club one relationship at a time. So I've had the opportunity to meet incredible investors over the years, and one of the things, the ways that I did this was through the uh, um, Flipping Females community in that program where we partnered with, one woman per house, and we literally walked side by side. We flipped over 500 houses here in the Phoenix Valley. Again, one relationship at a time. And that's how it works. And that's what we're doing here, only with more people and allowing more people to create these 7 streams of income for their families. So, one of the many, I'm sorry, one thing many of them have in common isn't necessarily that they're the smartest people in the room. It's that they're lifelong learners. Let me say that again. They're lifelong learners. So they ask thoughtful questions, they stay curious, they surround themselves with people who challenge them to think differently. That's exactly the kind of community we want 7 streams to become. So if today's presentation sparked your curiosity, here's what's happening next. So first, let me say thank you. Thank you for spending the last half hour with us. We know that your time is valuable, and we hope that you've walked away with at least one new perspective on diversification and an alternative asset class. So now, if today's presentation resonated with you, we'd love to continue the presentation. Not because we're asking you to invest today. We're not. Today's goal was simply to introduce you to how to think. So here's what happens next. Step 1, complete the investor interest form. You can do that by scanning the QR code right there on the screen. That simply tells us that you'd like to stay connected and learn more. Step 2, we'll schedule a relaxed, no pressure discovery conversation. We'll answer your questions. We'll learn more about your goals. We'll explain how the investor club works, and we'll determine together whether it's a good fit. Step 3, as future opportunities become available, you'll have the opportunity to learn about them. So review the information and decide whether any of them align with your objectives. So there's absolutely no obligation, no pressure, no expectations, literally just education and a conversation. So the 5-year vision, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Imagine it's 5 years from today. Imagine looking back at the decisions you've made. Would you rather have spent those 5 years relying on one investment strategy? Or would you rather have spent those 5 years learning, diversifying, and gradually building multiple streams of income? That's the question 7 streams was created to help people explore. Because we believe that wealth isn't built by chasing the next big thing. It's built by consistently making thoughtful decisions over time. So whether you ultimately invest with us, invest somewhere else, or simply leave today thinking differently about diversification, we hope this conversation has been very valuable. If it has, we invite you to take the next step, complete the investor interest form. Let's schedule a conversation. Let's get to know each other, and let's explore whether 7 streams investor club is the right fit for your goals. So I want to thank you again for being here. Hoy and I truly appreciate your time, and we look forward to connecting with many of you. I hope that you have an absolutely wonderful day.
Great
So
job.
pause the thing. So here's where we would do Q&A, but it looks like everybody who was here just popped off. So yeah, we would do Q&A. So we had this recording, so let me stop everything. Let me escape. Okay.